Hello, my name is Yuran. Welcome to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. In today's video, I'll be showing you my Eldritch Fire Knight build, which will be a fighter wizard multi-class that will focus around dealing heavy melee damage, while also dealing fire damage with those melee attacks, and will also be capable of some spellcasting. For example, we will be able to throw around fireballs. Alright, so let's get into the character creation. So for your race, you can go with any race you may prefer. In my case, I went with the Dragonborn, to be exact, with the Brass Dragonborn, since this Dragonborn does synergize with our element quite well, since we have the Fire Breath and we also have Fire Resistance. Now, the other two sub-races of Dragonborn that will synergize with this would be, I believe, the Gold Dragon and the Red Dragon, since both of them have Fire Breath as well. The difference between those two and the Brass Dragonborn is the Brass Dragonborn's Fire Breath is a column of fire instead of being a cone. So basically the same thing, just a little bit different. It's not too much of a big difference. Just go with the color you may prefer, or if you're role-playing, go with the evil / good dragons, so to say. For our class, we're going as a fighter. It's going to give us the second wind ability. It's a 1d10 plus our fighter level heal as a bonus action. And then for our fighting style, we're going with the great weapon fighting. When we roll a 1 or 2 on a damage die for an attack with a two-handed melee weapon, that die is re-rolled once, so it's going to help us deal more than our minimum damage if we do end up rolling the minimum damage. Since we are also going to be focusing primarily on carrying around the Everburn blade, this blade does eventually become relatively not so useful since it doesn't have enchantment, but in Act 2 you can get a weapon that you can essentially enchant any weapon in the game with, and also give it an element of damage, so it is going to further boost the Everburn blade. And then lastly, for ability scores, we're going with 17 strength, 10 dexterity, 14 constitution, 16 intelligence. 17 strength is here, of course, because this is going to be our main weapon damage dealing modifier. It's going to help us with accuracy, damage, and also mobility, since we'll be able to jump further. Dexterity 10 is here. I didn't put it onto 8 just so I don't have a negative initiative, so that their initiative is a 1d4 instead of being a -1. You could, if you don't care about that, put this into wisdom or charisma. Either of those two would work. Constitution 14, we don't need high constitution, since as a fighter we will have generally relatively high HP to begin with, and we'll be able to get advantage on constitution saving throws through an elixir, so we don't need this to be too high. Plus, as a fighter, we also have proficiency in constitution saving throws, so that's quite helpful as well. So we can easily get away with having it a little bit lower. And 16 intelligence is going to be for our spellcasting, since Eldritch Knights and Wizards pull from the intelligence as their spellcasting modifier, so we want this to be relatively high so our cantrips can be good accuracy, same with some of our spells such as the Scorching Rays. For our skill proficiencies, now for my background, I went with the Guild Artisan. This is why I have proficiency from my background in Persuasion and Insight. Both of these are quite good. You can go with any background you prefer for your role-playing purposes, or if you have a different preference. Then for the other skills we have here on offer, I went with Perception. Perception is quite good. It is very important for fighting hidden or invisible, well, I would say probably obscured buttons and levers. So it is probably one of the better skills you can take here. Survival is okay, but I would suggest having this on only one character in your party for fighting those buried caches or chests. We don't need Intimidation since we already have Persuasion. History is not too good, same thing with animal handling. And then acrobatics and athletics, you can go either or here. I'm going to stick with athletics. Alright, so at level 2 we unlock our action surge and we can move on to level 3. At level 3 we unlock our subclass, and here we're going with the Eldritch Knight. This is going to get our start on our spellcasting, so we'll have in the end 3rd level spell slots, which is going to mean we'll be able to learn Fireball from a spell scroll once we get our wizard going. But anyway, for our cantrips, we're of course going as with the Firebolt, since we are fire-focused Eldritch Knight. This is going to synergize quite greatly with our whole theme and build. And then for the second one is the Friends. This is more of a civic cantrip. This gives you advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures, which is very useful when you're trying to persuade somebody. Just do keep in mind that if you are still in the area when the duration runs out or you stop concentrating on it, the character you cast this on might accuse you of enchanting him and you will have trouble with the guards. So you want to leave the area before you stop concentrating on this spell. Then for the two spells that we have to choose here, I would suggest, of course, going with the shield. This is going to increase your armor class by 5, and you will be immune to magic missile damage as a reaction. A very useful level 1 spell that's going to be handy for you throughout the entire game. And then the second spell I would suggest is the Magic Missile. Magic Missile guarantees 2 to 5 force damage with every dart, so it fires 3 darts at level 1. This is a very useful spell for finishing off low health enemies, because I'm pretty sure we've all been there where there's an enemy with like 2 or 3 hit points left, and you somehow miss them 4 or 5 times in a row and they are somehow still alive with basically being dead. So this can help you completely prevent that. Or it's also useful when you need to damage multiple enemies at once. For example, if there is a lot of illusionary enemies that disappear after they take even 1 point of damage. So this is also quite nice for that. For the expanded spells, we're going to go with the Protection from Evil and Good. This is a very useful spell to have throughout the entire game, since it does help you against against aberrations, fiends, and undead. These are the most common ones. Celestials, elementals aren't too common, but you can find a few of them. But anyway, all of these types of enemies, they can't charm you, frighten you, or possess you, and then they have disadvantage on attacks against you. So, and it lasts a thing long rest. So as long as you concentrate on it, you will have this protection, which is quite handy to have. At level 4, we unlock additional spell slot, or a spell, and here we're gonna go with the Burning Hands. This is a nice little 3d6 fire damage spell that you shoot out in a cone in front of you, similar to your breath attack weapon, but I would use this if there are 2 or more enemies in front of you, so that then you deal damage to all of them. And then for our first feat, we're going to go with ability improvement +2 into strength. This is going to help our combat prowess and also mobility. And then at this point, on level 5, you can deal with anti-ethel, where you can get a +1 into any other ability point. And there I would suggest putting it into strength, so you get it to a nice 20. At level 5, we unlock our extra attack and we can move on. At level 6, we unlock our second feat, and here we're going into ability improvement again, but we're going to put it +2 into intelligence. This is going to help boost our spellcasting, so it's similar to our strength. So at this point, you would probably have 20 strength and 18 intelligence, which is comparable. At level 7, we unlock our Warm Magic feature, which allows us to use our weapon action as a bonus action after we cast a cantrip first. So you can use a Firebolt, and then you can whack them with your weapon afterwards. Then for the 2 spells we're gonna go for here is the Scorching Ray and Darkness. Scorching Ray is a nice synergy with our build, since it deals fire damage 66, so it hurls 3 rays, each dealing 2d6 fire damage. And then Darkness is nice for zoning out ranged enemies so that they cannot shoot you, since if they can't see through it, they can't shoot through it, or through the darkness itself. At level 8, we get an additional expanded spell slot, and here we're going to go with Magic Weapon. This is going to help us with the Everburn Blade, since we can then enchant it for additional +1, or if we cast this at level 4, we can do this through an elixir, it's going to be a +2. We will be getting advantage on concentration saving throws through an elixir, so this is a quite handy thing to have regardless. You don't need to, but I found it to be quite handy in my testing of this, so I'll be going with this as I did in my testing. Then for the replace spell, we're going to replace Darkness, and we're going to replace it with, of course, Misty Step, probably the best mobility spell in the game. As a bonus action, you can teleport to an area, unoccupied space that you can see. And then for our third feat, we're gonna go with the Savage Attacker. When making melee weapon attacks, you roll your damage die twice and you use the highest result. Now this works with the weapon damage dice, but also with any additional damage dice on the weapon that you have. So in the Everburn Blade's case, because of our gloves and the weapon itself, and then with the Drake Throat Glaive, we'll have 3d4 fire damage. It works on those as well. So overall, all of those dice will deal more damage because of this. And in those cases, when there are characters with a lot of damage dice on their weapon attacks, I prefer Savage Attacker over something like Great Weapon Master. At level 9, we're going to start our multi-class, and we're going to go into a Wizard. What a Wizard does for us, it's going to allow us to learn spells from scrolls, and it's also going to allow us at level 10 to gain subclass, which is going to make it so that we can harm our allies with our fireballs. Then for our 3 Wizard cantrips, I would suggest going with Shocking Grasp. Reason is, Firebolt is a range cantrip, and then if you try to cast it in melee, it's going to be most likely with disadvantage. And we're going to have a ring that is going to synergize with us casting cantrips, and it's going to give us arcane synergy. And this is going to help us sort of circumvent that. Now it does deal lightning damage, but that's fine. We're only going to need it for the arcane synergy, since this, of course, is a melee cantrip, and it also has advantage on creatures wearing metal armor. But otherwise, whenever we are at range, we will be using the firebolt. Then for the other two cantrips, you can take supportive cantrips. You don't necessarily need damage dealing cantrips. Something like light is still useful. Even we should be at towards the tail end of Act 2 here. Or you can use something like the Mage Hand, or potentially the Minor Illusion instead of light, since we will be getting out of the, of course, Darklands. So it is completely up to you here. Now for the spells, you don't need to worry too much about this. A lot of these spells we will not be using. We're going to be using a lot of level 2 and 3 spells. But just so you have to level up, I was just picking up something like Hand Sleep and Long Strider. Find Familiar is nice. Tasha's Hideous Laughter and Thunderwave, and then, I don't know, Grease. For the prepared spells, I won't be equipping anything just yet. I will do that on level 12, since I do have Fireball here, and I learned it after I got to level 12. Just a warning, once you get this wizard level, do not go too crazy on learning spells from scrolls, because what's going to happen, potentially, is you're going to lock yourself out of leveling up. You might end up with having to only be able to learn one spell, but you need to learn 2 spells for the level up, or you will have no spells to learn and you won't be able to level up at all as a wizard. Alright, so at level 12 we unlock our wizard subclass, and here we're going to go with the evocation. This is going to give us sculpt spells. We create pockets of safety within our evocation spells, allows them to automatically succeed their saving throws, and these spells take no damage from those spells. Then the 2 spells we will learn here is going to be Chromatic Orb and, let's say, False Life. Then for the prepared spells, we're going to move on. At level 11, we unlock 2 additional level 2 spells. Here, I would suggest going with the Mirror Image and Blur. Mirror Image increases your armor class by 3, so it's a nice defensive spell that doesn't require concentration. And then you have Blur, which gives disadvantage on enemy attacks as long as you're concentrating on it. It's also a nice defensive spell. And finally, at level 12, we unlock additional cantrip. In here, I'll just take Bone Chill, since it can prevent enemies from healing. And then for the last 2 spells, I was just taking Enlarge and Reduce and Hold Person. Enlarge, Reduce, you would cast this on yourself. You would enlarge yourself, so you deal additional 1d4 damage with your damage die. You then also gain advantage on strength checks. And then Hold Person, of course, if you need to and you want to try to cast this on somebody, you can, and then you hold them to gain guaranteed crits. Or if you have any other preference of these other spells, you can, but since we're a wizard, we can change these on the fly. Now, for our 4th and last feat, we're going with Elemental Adept, and we're going to be taking it into fire. This is going to make sure that when the spells that deal fire damage and attacks that deal fire damage, they're going to ignore fire resistance, and when we deal damage with a spell, we cannot roll a 1, so it's going to help us deal increased damage with our spells as well. Okay, now for the prepared spells, since we're at level 12, this is the point where I would suggest you to start learning spells from scrolls, since then you can't really get locked out anymore, since this is the last level in the game. But anyway, for the prepared spells, I would take Fireball, Enlarge, Reduce, Blur, Mirror Image, and Hold Person. And then for the level 1 ones, Thunderwave is nice, Hand Sleep is nice because it's a ritual spell, so you can cast this for free outside of combat. In combat, well, it's gonna cost you. And then for the last one, you can go with anything. I'll just take Long Strider. You have to equip some spells for the level up, but then once you have your spellbook outside of the level up screen, you can then unequip any ones that you don't want to clog up your UI, so you don't need to have them all equipped. Alright, so that is it for the levels, and I'll see you in the equipment section. Alright, so here we are in the equipment section, so let's start with our headgear. Here we have the Hood of the Weave. When you gain a +2 bonus to spell save DC and attack rolls, so this is going to help with our spellcasting, accuracy, and of course enemies, making sure that they potentially save less often on our fireball when you do cast it, so we deal full damage to them. Then we have the Flawed Helldusk Helmet. The wielder has a +2 bonus to saving throws against spells and constitutional saving throws +1, so this is going to help us basically a defensive helmet against spellcasters. For the cloak, we're going with the Cinder Moth Cloak. A creature that damages the wearer within 7 feet receives burning, so they take 1d4 fire damage per turn. Then for the other two cloaks we have here, for the alternatives, we have the Cloak of Protection, armor class and saving throws +1, and Cloak of the Weave, which gives you +1 bonus to spell save DC and attack rolls, further increasing your spellcasting capabilities if you want it to be higher. For the armor, we're going with the Flawed Helldusk armor. When you're hit by a foe within 7 feet, it might take 1d4 fire damage, so this can trigger along with the Cindermouth Cloak, so they should take 2d4 fire damage instead of 1d4. But sometimes one can trigger, not the other, and vice versa. It also has the Superior Blade. You take 1 less piercing damage and then disadvantage on stealth checks. For the gloves, we're going with the Flawed Helldusk gloves. Your weapon attacks deal additional 1d4 fire damage, your arm attacks deal additional 1d4 necrotic damage, and possibly inflict bleeding. Strength saving throws +1. Now, the second half of this effect won't really work for us since we will not be punching anybody with these, but the first effect will work since we will deal now additional 1d4 fire damage, which is quite nice. For the early game alternatives, you could go with the Gloves of the Growling Underdog. The wearer gains advantage on melee attacks while surrounded by 2 or more foes. So these are very nice early game gloves to gain basically free advantage. For the boots, we're going with the Boots of Elemental Momentum. Whenever the wearer deals acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage with a spell or cantrip, they gain 2 momentum. They get momentum for 2 turns. Now, these boots are funky. Sometimes when you deal damage with a fireball or some other spell, you will get something like 25-24 stacks of this for 1 or 2 turns, and then your speed will be like almost 200 or 100, something like that. It's going to be ridiculously high. I'm going to assume that this happens because Fireball deals a lot of damage to more than one entities, so this gets out of hand because I think the maximum stacks you can get with this is 5. So yeah, it can get pretty. It's pretty funky. Now, for the alternatives for all of these, you could go with the actual full set of the Helldusk armor instead of the flawed one, but I prefer this one because it looks much nicer and it's just a personal preference. So you could go with the full Helldusk armor, not the flawed Helldusk. That's completely up to you. But anyway, for our amulet, we're going with the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation. When one of your cantrips deals acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage, you add your spellcasting modifier damage dealt. So this is now going to increase our damage dealt from our spells with our intelligence. So it's going to be a +5. So it's going to be 3d10 +5. So that's a pretty good amulet to have on this. Then for our rings, we're going with the Ring of Arcane Synergy. When you deal damage with a cantrip, you gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. This is going to help us quite a lot with the damage since we want to activate this every time the effect turns off. So basically, use Shocking Grasp or Firebolt, activate the Arcane Synergy. Arcane Synergy is going to give us +5 to all damage since it uses our spellcasting ability modifier to increase our weapon damage, weapon attacks damage. And then for the second ring, we have the Ring of Elemental Infusion. When you deal acid, cold, fire, lightning, and thunder damage using a spell or a cantrip, the element infuses your weapon. Until the end of your next turn, you deal additional 1d4 damage with that element. So it can increase your damage with an element for 1d4 for 1 turn, or for 2 turns, but for 1 attack. Then for our weapons, we have the Everburn Blade. It's a 2d6, so it's a great sword that deals 1d4 fire damage naturally. The way we can boost this weapon is if we use the Drake Throat Glaive, which if we equip it, we have the Draconic Elemental Weapon. And we can infuse any other weapon with this weapon. So how I did it was you plop down the Airborne Blade on the floor, you take the Fire Infusion, you infuse the weapon, and now the Airborne Blade deals 3D. I don't know why it doesn't show here, but it shows the enchantment +1 now. But also we can see the elemental weapon, right? But if you go to our main hand attack, we have 3d4. So 1d4 from the weapon, 1d4 from the gloves, and 1d4 from the enchantment. So this is a very nice weapon. Even if you don't want to use it as your main weapon, it is very nice for enchanting other weapons. Now the alternative, you could use the Hellfire Great Axe. Whenever you deal damage with this weapon, you gain 2 turns of heat and then enchantment +2, and it gives you the Hellflame Cleave. Now, this is a very good weapon, just though keep in mind, I don't know if this is a bug or intended, but when you have heat, like heat stacks, and if you use a cantrip to try and gain Arcane Synergy, the game doesn't give you Arcane Synergy. So you have to basically attack, get rid of the heat, and then use a cantrip to gain Arcane Synergy. I don't know why it works like that. Feel free to tell me if for you it works just as fine, but for me it does not. So yeah. But anyway, for the other game alternatives, you could take the Swirtlebeast Woundseeker. The wielder gains 1d4 bonus attack rolls with the weapon when attacking creatures that have already taken damage. So if an enemy is wounded, you gain increased accuracy. And then we have the Sword of Justice, just basically a great sword with enchantment +1 that has Theater's Protection, which increases your armor class by 2 until long rest. So either one of these you could use alternatively, but I've been running with the Airborne Blade since the beginning, basically when I got it. For our ranged weapon, we're going with the Hell Rider Longbow. You gain +3 to initiative and advantage on perception ability checks. This is the main reason we're going with this as a stat stick for the extra initiative. You also gain the Fiendish Fire effect, but this is if you use the weapon and you attack with it, you possibly afflict your target with Fairy Fire, one target per turn. For the alternatives, you could use the Bow of Awareness. It gives you it gives you +1 to initiative rolls, which is quite handy. And then the Hunting Shortbow and the Gandril's Aspiration for the same reason, which is we want it for the advantage against monstrosity type enemies. Basically the same reason. Now, the elixir that I've been running with this character, so what you can do, what I mentioned earlier, is if you drink a Supreme Elixir of Arcane Cultivation, and then you cast Magic Weapon at level 4. If you look here, casting this spell using a 4th, 5th level will give it a +2, and then 6th level will give it a +3. So 2 and 3 are +1, 4 and 5 are +2. Since we're using it through an elixir, we can cast that, and then we have enchantment +3 with the elemental weapon, and then of course the magic weapon. And then what I like to do is I drink the elixir of Peerless Focus, and now we can basically ensure that it is very hard for enemies to break our concentration, although we are prone to being knocked prone and then breaking concentration that way, but I found it to be not happening too often, since a lot of times I've been concentrating on this for probably the entire long rest. So it is quite nice, since this will help you deal a little bit of extra damage, because each one of these enchantments deals +1 damage, so total +3 damage. And then on top of that, we gain a +3 to hit, so it's pretty decent, although it's not necessary since we already have that from the Drake Throat Glaive. Alright, so that is it for the equipment session. I'll now see you in the combat showcase. Alright, so here we are at the Flaming Fists Barracks for yet another ball showcase. So before combat started, I did have to get rid of the annoying wizard, and I cast the whole person on the Steel Watcher. Knowing my luck, he would probably cripple the entire party and then, or not cripple, but maim, so we couldn't move. But anyway, you would also notice that I am on a different save compared to the rest of the video, just because this is the original save I've been testing this on, and I managed to almost lock myself out of progressing as a wizard, since I did learn too many spells from the scrolls. And so I had to get relatively creative with how to progress, and I actually did manage to do it anyway, so it didn't all get in the end for naught. But anyway, before the combat started, I did apply all of the buffs to my sword, so we have enchantment +3 because of all of these buffs, and of course now we can have the 3d4 fire damage bonus. So how you would open up this, if this was a fight where you would need a lot of damage, you could cast Enlarging yourself plus Mirror Image, or you could also do it with Blur. But for the sake of the showcase, we don't necessarily need that. So instead, what we're going to do is, normally we just want to cast Fireball on somebody, so we get our Arcane Acuity going. And now, since we did cast it, we got our Fire Infusion, Arcane Acuity, and Momentum from our boots. So now, let's start whacking. Now, if we'll take a look, our damage is going to be quite decent. So we had 30 damage and then 31 damage from our combination of fire and slashing, and of course we're a fighter. We can use Accent Surge, and we can keep going. Now let's see if the momentum bug that I mentioned earlier will happen this time when I cast Fireball here, since, well, we have Fireball, might as well use it, right? This will also infuse our weapon. Okay, so this time it didn't happen. We got to the maximum stacks instead. It didn't overstack it somehow. You will know, if you play with this, you will notice that it sometimes does happen. And then when you take look at your speed, it's gonna be like 100 plus instead of 55 feet or so on. It's gonna be 100 plus. So that's pretty comical, if I do say so myself. But anyway, generally that is it for the build. I hope you enjoyed. I would appreciate if you leave the like and subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you in the next one.